first ELP album, and we came to the end of the record, we were one song short. And everybody looked around the studio, we only had one day left to record. And everybody looked around the studio, you know, with vacant look, said, "Have you got any more material?" And I said, "Well, I've got this little folk song I wrote when I was a kid. You know, if we'd been looking for a filler, maybe we could use it." I played it, nobody liked it. And there it goes. And so Keith said, "Well, why don't you record it? I'm off down the pub." So he went down the pub, and I made the record basically on my own. Well, with Carl actually. But Carl and I played the original tape, which sounded dreadful, just drums and acoustic guitar. And then I put bass on, and some more guitars, and I played the lead solo on it, and then did the block harmonies, big harmony. By the time I finished, it sounded pretty good. It sounded like a real, you know, record. And Keith came back in and said, he was shocked. You know, he said, "Wow." And he said, I'd better play on that. So, he said, "Well, can I film again?" I said, "Yeah, I can film it." So he said, "I've just had this both synthesizer delivered back there, and I've never used it, I've chance to use it." And he said, "You never know, we might find something." So he went out into the studio and he started messing around with the thing. And there's an effect on it called portamento. And what that is you play a low note, you know, and then you play a high note, and it slides up to it. Boom. And that's portamento. And he said, "Just run the track and I'll rehearse it to see how long it takes to from one note to go to the other." And I always have this rule when I'm producing a record that I always record people experimenting. Because you just never know, sometimes you capture something very special. And so it was this time. That very first tape was the one that's on the record. And when we finished the run through, I turned to the engineer he offered and I said, was it me? Did that sound good?" And he said, "No, I think it did sound good." And I said, "Keith, I think you better come in and listen to it." And Keith said, No, I've figured it out now, I can do a proper one." And I said, No, the problem was that we only had, I can't remember, it was 8 or 16 tracks, but that was the last track. And so if he'd have done another one, we'd have had to have really lost that one. And so I thought to keep it, and in the end, he came in and listened to it, and the rest is history. But the way it goes sometimes. Here we go. I'll do it for you tonight. Here it is, Lucky Man. promise to a friend who cried, no money to save. So he lay down and he died.